I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk, now!
Hello, and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me in the studio, the runner-up for Paul McCartney in the Sam Mendes movies, it's Andy Greenwald!
Thank you for the intro. For what it's worth, that is not confirmed. So until I get the call from my team, I think I'm still in the mix.
You're still in it. I mean, Ridley Scott said Paul Mescal is going to play Paul McCartney.
As the internet has said also for months.
We just decided, yeah.
Hey.
Well, the internet's never wrong. Andy, it's great to see you. We are here at The Watch. A couple of bits of admin.
Okay.
So today we're in a new studio. We're doing this on video as well, so you can find us on the Ringer TV YouTube channel.
Yes.
Please subscribe to that. We're putting up extra bits and bobs in the next couple of weeks for people to see on the channel. That's been going great so far. I did a video with Rob and Joanna last week about kind of holiday viewing recommendations. You can also follow us now on Instagram on the at the Watch Pod. Is that right,
Oh,
Kyle?
wait, we have our own Instagram account?
Yeah, we have our own Instagram account at the Watch Pod _. You can find us on Instagram. I had one more thing I was gonna say. Oh, next week, just to give people a heads up, we were gonna do our 10 best today. We're gonna do it on Monday, but we're gonna do some Say Nothing today.
Yeah.
We haven't really done it together, I realized.
No.
I talked to Patrick Raddenkeefe. You talked to Sean Fennessy. Two great Irishmen.
I was about to say, we both found our personal Irishman for that.
So we'll do the sort of second half of the season of Say Nothing. I have a couple of pieces of news for you first. Do you want to just...
Yeah, I kind of just want to ask you how you feel about this, because we're sitting in a very different way today, and I wonder if it's going to be noticeable in how we sound. Because usually we are across the table from each other, like
crossfire style.
Well, like people taking a deposition in the television show Landman. Like, that's the kind of energy that we bring.
Yeah.
Right now, we're kind of on the same side, and it's making me a little bit squirrely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think that it's really bad podcasting to talk about how we look.
No, not on YouTube all of a sudden.
I think we'll be fine, and I'm happy to be bringing our brand to multiple platforms.
I mean, I know we have an Instagram account. I heard we have email too.
Oh, yeah, we have an email address.
Do we have a fax number?
thewatch@spotify.com. So if you guys have mailbag questions or just questions you'd like to see answered on the pod, or if you just have some personal tips you'd like to pass along to me and Andy.
Or if you're like just raising money for attorneys general races across the country, please spam that address.
Greenwald, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I made fun of Paul Mescal being cast as Paul McCartney, but that's really pales in comparison to the most important casting announcement that happened this week. I can't sugarcoat this. I don't want to dress it up in any fun way.
Should you?
Jeremy Allen White has been cast as Jabba the Hutt's son in The Mandalorian and Grogu. And I will say that I am... I have not been this excited to see a son on screen since Passion of the Christ.
Wow. Wow. Well done.
Yeah.
This is...
Now, when we say say he's been cast, I think one thing that happens a lot now is that the film has been shot. I think principal photography ended on Mandalorian and Grogu.
Has Pedro Pascal been informed of that?
I think he's been doing it on his phone from the Gladiator 2 promo run.
Do you remember?
He's like,
you know what
where's
I
the child?
Do you remember when we had this is like during peak pandemic times when we had lots of guests because everyone was available, and we had what's his name, Tony, the guy who played Lalo on
Tony Dalton
on Better Call Saul, and he called in from his iPhone that he was holding as if he was catching sunlight with a solar panel.
He was, and it was in a jungle somewhere. Yeah,
I feel like that's where Pedro Pascal is in terms of like his performance in The Mandalorian.
So one thing I really hadn't considered. And didn't really want to consider was the idea of Jabba the Hutt procreating.
Oh, the Hutts are a proud family. How do you think they get so many of them?
And I guess this also betrays the fact that I did not complete the Book of Boba Fett. I usually finish
because
books.
the end, they're just fucking.
No, it's his cousins, I think.
These cousins, the Hutts, they're the ones screwing?
I think the cousins are like some of the antagonists of the Book of Boba Fett.
Just picture Evan Moss Bacharach yelling cousin.
I don't know where to start with this with you.
I have some thoughts, but please.
Do you think that this is going to be voice work, a la Pedro Pascal or whatever? Or do you think that Jeremy is going to go through a grotesque Brendan Fraser in the whale-like transformation?
If it was any other young, promising actor being cast as a evil space worm, in this film, I would say this is just a paycheck job.
Yeah.
But the thing about Jeremy, and we love Jeremy, we all love him.
We do.
Here
Sure.
in town.
Yeah. And I'm really happy for him because Juan Soto got signed to the Mets. You know?
Okay, so everything's coming up,
Yeah,
Jeremy. I'm just saying that when you have an actor like Jeremy, he does the work. You know, and I feel like he is going to really, even if it is just voice acting, I think that he will want to make his body as worm-like as possible.
But the thing is that he is currently shooting
Right.
the Bruce Springsteen movie in Asbury Park, and he looks hot. So he's probably not in the moments that I haven't seen him recently.
Yeah.
Expanded his repertoire, so to say.
So you don't think that he could just turn it on
But
and off?
also, are we sure the Hutts have to look like that? Now, I'm currently looking...
Wait a second. Are you suggesting there's a hot Hutt?
That's what I'm wondering.
Jabba the Hutt? This is an incredible
And what if
pivot.
his whole thing is like, he's alienated from his family. He's always been too skinny.
So Mama Hutt is trying to fatten him up? To like,
Every time he comes home, they're like, are you eating? Like...
Wait, I'm sorry. Were you reaching for like a Jewish mother? Like fat? Like, you're so skinny.
Yeah.
Jeremy the Hutt. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really roll in these Tatooine streets. You know, I don't know.
So I spent 15 minutes on Wikipedia last night, and you got nothing for me? I mean, like, are you excited by this prospect? Do you think that Mandalorian and Grogu will be good?
Here's the thing. You know this about
This
me.
is going to be like, for this kid,
Yeah.
the son of
kid?
the Hutt.
What's his name?
Rhoda, I think. Rhoda.
It's not Rhoda.
And he's like big stinks, right? Like his whole thing is like
Excuse
he
me?
smells bad.
What do you mean his whole
I had
thing?
this conversation with Mallory yesterday. I thought we talked about this.
How dare you?
Okay, so apparently...
Well, apparently according to what? What is this based on?
Wikipedia.
But that's the
It's
internet.
canon.
Well, where was it written as canon? Did
I think
Mallory
it's like in a
fanfic?
comic or something.
So there's
like
a comic that Jabba the Hutt has a stink son that's too skinny?
No. I made the skinny part up.
Okay, but it is canonical that Jabba the Hutt has a son and heir.
Yeah.
Is he like a fail son?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you'd imagine Jeremy Allen White
Is he
playing
Don
the son.
Jr. or Eric?
Which one has the...
Which one stinks?
No, which one has the ex-wife who's now the ambassador of Greece?
DJ JR.
Oh, yeah.
DJTJR.
Okay, and then Eric's wife is going to become the senator from Florida, right?
I don't read the news anymore, so I'm just getting this in real time.
Hot Hutt, yeah. So I think if I read Wikipedia correctly,
Okay.
Mandalorian and Grogu takes place after Jedi, as we all know.
Christ.
And this Hutt is he's sort of the Kendall Roy, a little bit troubled.
Okay, that's what I was
And I
reaching
think
for.
stinks. I think that's like his thing, is he reeks.
That's not a thing that's not like your power move. Or maybe it is. You walk into the boardroom. Sorry, you slither into the boardroom. Okay. I have a couple thoughts here.
Yeah.
Where are you with Hutts generally? Like, do you enjoy, have you even seen I think now the official final boss version of A New Hope that Jabba is in? You know about this, right? That like...
Yeah, I remember that.
That like in the 70s,
Where
Lucas filmed a scene with an actor playing a part called Jabba the Hutt that confronts Han before they leave Tatooine, and then they cut it because he's like, no, worm technology hasn't evolved where I need it to be.
Yes.
And then once it had, they went back and they drew a weirdly mobile and quite slim, actually, so maybe this is relevant, Jabba over that actor.
Yes.
So that scene is now canon.
Yes.
So do you generally like more Jabba?
I think like a lot of things in Star Wars, and we talked about Skeleton Crew a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I don't really know how much meat there is on the bone, no Hutt, to talk about Star Wars again.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that there will be a passing reference, a character is in the background. A character is like a sort of like, oh, look at that big worm who gambles.
Yeah.
And then they make that into like a show. They're like, what can we scrape here to make into a show or a movie? What if this happened? And sometimes that works out great, like Rogue One.
Yes.
Sometimes it's about a time period or a factoid or footnote that is never really even occurred to me as interesting. But yeah, like I think that this is sort of the reason why we keep talking about Star Wars is really interesting people get involved with it and do things in it. And then the reason why we keep laughing at Star Wars is because they play Jabba the Hutt's smelly son.
This is exactly what I'm saying. You know me. All the listeners know me. New friends on YouTube get to know me. I don't like to overreact to small bits of cultural effluvia, but we are deeply cooked. as a people based on this newsflash alone.
Because the Hutts.
Well, just that, like,
the Hutts have taken over.
This sunken franchise manages to get one of the rising actors of his generation to be a part of it, and he's playing a fat, stinking worm son.
Yeah.
That's what you got for me?
Yeah, but maybe, like I said, like maybe there's some wrinkle to this character that I don't know
There are a
about.
lot of wrinkles.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Hutt family dermatology?
Also, the weird thing about it is that Jabba the Hutt speaks Hutt, I think, or like they have like
I believe it's
own,
Huttese.
and they have their own native language. So it's just like you're really just getting the Jeremy Allen White timbre in this. It's not even like if he's doing voice acting, I wonder if he's going to be speaking in this language.
Do you think that maybe the natural order of things is once you play an iconic musician like Jeremy is playing Bruce Springsteen, then you become, enmeshed in the CGI Star Wars universe, that Paul Mescal, after he's done playing Paul McCartney, will take on the role of Salacious B. Crumb in an origin story for the weird rat guy that hangs out next to Jabba.
See, this is the thing, is that you act like you hate Star Wars and then you know Salacious B. Crumb's name.
I don't know his middle name. I don't know what the B stands for.
Maybe it's like World Be Free.
I think it stands for business.
Yeah,
Salacious
it stands
business.
on business.
Crumb. This is...
So you're like, we're cooked, we're in the sunken place,
Yeah.
this is dark, we're never going to get out.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm excited about the new senator from Florida, but other than that, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I did all that work to set this up then.
Where else do you want to take this?
I thought you were going to be like we need to bury this. You know what I mean? Like we need to get out from under this.
Oh, we do. I see what you mean. You thought instead of just like resigning myself to slipping into the pit of Sarlacc, so to speak.
Yeah.
I would say we need to just dig ourselves out of this like Bane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but how? How can we do this? I completely agree.
I think like I've always said, this thing needs to go away.
Yeah.
It needs to go away for 5 to 10 years or 7 years, split the difference. And they need to redesign this franchise. They need to think about how they want to move forward. They probably need to move off of Skywalker. But everything about contemporary Hollywood tells us that that's not going to happen, because if there's any juice left in the lemon, they're going to squeeze it. Also,
the only thing that causes reboots, like genuine reboots, is cleaning of the house. And, I am not advocating for anyone to lose their jobs, but like the current regime at Lucasfilm is pretty entrenched.
Yeah.
And the longer they keep kicking the can down the road in terms of actually making something that is attempting to be like a cultural footprint of like, this is what we do here. This is how we move this forward. This is how we reclaim our place at the forefront of global pop culture. Then the more time they have to sort of dick around in the margins with stuff like this. And, I appreciate that this podcast is moving forward a little bit with Instagram and email, but, the real heads get their news only from their Facebook feeds.
Sure.
And I get a lot of Star Wars content service to me, which is just like state of the franchise, but it's like attempting to be exciting. And it's like Mandalorian Grogu, it's coming out soon. There are Hutts in it. And then it's like the new Jedi Order. Daisy Ridley stars in this exciting film set 50 years after Episode 9, currently on its 4th screenwriter. Like, that's honestly, this is like being a Pittsburgh Pirates fan.
Yeah.
Like, your uniforms are very, very cool, but every year it's the same disappointing shit.
That is the best way of putting it.
It deserves better, as do the fine people of Pittsburgh.
You're talking about reboots. Let's get off of Star Wars, because
Okay.
I feel like we've kind of hit the pinata a lot. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the Friday Night Lights reboot, because news broke today on Deadline that will be making its way to Peacock after a bidding war between Peacock and Netflix.
You don't often see Peacock outspending Netflix for something.
I was wondering whether or not there was some nuance to that negotiation where Peacock having some kind of... Would Universal have to get paid off either way because they own the rights to the whole
Universal
franchise?
gets paid either way, yeah. But
Yeah.
I at least assuming, I mean, I have no knowledge of this deal whatsoever, but at least assuming that this town still runs under the same rubric it's run under for the last 10 years, the studio is seeking the best deal possible, even when it's within the same corporate ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah.
So generally, Netflix wins those.
Okay, so Universal Television's producing the series. It comes from Jason Katims, or obviously the original showrunner of the beloved series. Pete Berg and Brian Grazer will help executive produce the new series. I wonder if he'll return as a director. He's got a series on Netflix coming early next year called American Primeval. The new iteration of Friday Night Lights will be set following a devastating hurricane when a ragtag high school football team and their damaged interim coach make an unlikely bid for a Texas high school state championship, and become a beacon of light for their town. So that's just a log line.
He wasn't damaged in the hurricane, right? We don't have any.
No, I think it's supposed to be like a difficult man interim coach.
I'm listening.
I obviously there will probably be some connective tissue to the original. So while nobody is like kind of been announced as returning to West Texas, I would be surprised if they did not have people coming back. At this point, would any of the original high schoolers have children who are in high school now?
Well, some of the characters were quite promiscuous. So it's
That's
possible.
not what I meant.
It's very possible.
I just can't remember how old they were.
Like in the show timeline?
Yeah, the characters were like 18 in 2006, so it's 2024.
Okay.
I think
it's possible.
Could Tyra's kid be?
Tyra went off to college. She's living a professional life.
Okay.
I think that she got out of
All right,
Dylan.
I definitely imagine that there are going to be people coming back.
There are going to be people. And yes, of course they could fudge that because who knows when the show's actually going to come out. And let me say also, I was kind of surprised by this. It did feel, and obviously we're still a ways away from getting any actual casting news or evidence that it's being shot, but the fact that there was a bidding war, the fact that there's a log line suggests that this is much further along than anyone had anticipated. I think word broke like a few weeks ago that this was a possibility.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought it was just like a lot of these other, kind of maybe we should run it back.
It's like a test balloon.
Yeah, exactly. Or that it's something that everyone would like to do if they could find the right take. Like Battlestar Galactica reboot or whatever the reboot du jour has been over the last few years. And no, they seem to have it and they're running with it, and it seemed to have been attractive enough for Netflix to be involved. And I would also say that the Netflix involvement definitely backs up my personal gut feeling assertion that the show is much bigger culturally than it ever was when it was on the air.
Yeah, I think that it's a highly influential show. You can still see traces of it, for instance, in Taylor Sheridan shows, especially Landman. I think obviously it served as like a graduating class for a bunch of really significant actors, most specifically Jesse Plemons and Michael B. Jordan. The log line does remind me of the Voodoo plot.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, which was one that was pretty quickly discarded, I think, after
it was kind of a misfire.
Sort of half a season, right? But was an interesting one. That was Aldous Hodge, right? Was Voodoo?
Was it?
I thought it was.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that. I was just going to say that the cultural footprint of it is even bigger than I realized because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but recently I've been working abroad. And the majority of the people that I'm working with could not name a single position on an American football team, but fucking love this show.
They have watched Friday Night Lights.
Yes,
yeah.
And I think it actually proves it's like proof of concept, right? Because even when Friday Night Lights premiered on NBC all those years ago, there were articles about how sports shows aren't four quadrant.
Yeah.
They aren't going to appeal to everyone, and this show continually did that.
Do your British colleagues think that all of American football is just Hail Marys at the last second
with
to win the
explosions in the
state
sky playing?
championship?
Which you know what I do actually sometimes in down moments in the room is I show them footage of the 2024 Eagles passing offense. And they're like, well, this doesn't look poetic at all.
Yeah. Is Matt Saracen better than Jalen Hurts?
In certain situations, perhaps.
So that's interesting. I didn't have anything else really except for...
So are you pro this? Like, do you feel like is this a perpetually seaworthy vessel that could be rebooted many, many times?
Oh, I definitely think there's a world in which Friday Night Lights could have just been an indefinitely running series. You would have to get over, allowing Coach Taylor to go to Penn or wherever he was coaching. I
feel like he went to. Oh no, she went to Swarthmore or whatever, right? And then he was coaching high school at the end. I just did this on Stick the Landing.
He was an offensive coordinator for a college team at the end, wasn't he?
I just did this for Stick the Landing, like within the calendar year, and I could not tell you where he was coaching.
Did you ever contemplate it?
I'm sure I did, but it was hard to see through the tears in my eyes.
That's right.
Such a beautiful finale. But you didn't confirm that was Aldous Hodge as Ray Voodoo Tatum.
That's right. So I think that show could have just gone on forever. You could have just kept bringing in. There's no reason why Friday Night Lights couldn't have been Grey's Anatomy.
I agree, and I do like, not to harp on that one line in a log line, but the idea that they are actively steering away from the head coach being a saint, basically, in the way that Coach Taylor was, and saying that he is damaged.
Yeah.
A little bad news bearsy, maybe.
Yeah, kind of. It might actually. I wonder how much it might even go back to the Bissinger book, which I think has been pretty thoroughly adapted at this point. And like the Riggins character, it'll be interesting to see whether they make any of the kids echoes of the original characters.
I also think that for the the bigger picture industry stuff, I don't know anything about what went on behind the scenes, but it speaks well of Universal and NBC in its various tentacled forms and Peacock that they recognize that this is a cornerstone franchise for a certain network conglomerate of businesses, and you have to keep it in-house. I feel like Peacock's on a hot streak because Kaya's minutes are up watching the service, I know, and Day of the Jackal got a Golden Globe nomination.
That's right.
And so now, bang, 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 here we go. But I don't know.
It makes a trend, and we start talking about it on this pod.
But I do think about, I know this seems like really, really reaching, but I do think about a lot the time when NBC let Fox outbid them for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a show that I honestly didn't watch very much of, but is perfectly enjoyable and good. But that, like a Mike Schur comedy with a Saturday Night Live alum leading it, should never have left the building. I'm sure this is what Yankees fans are feeling right now. And ultimately it did come back to NBC. But I do think, maybe this is just such outdated thinking, but I still, for whatever reason, think that NBC has a certain brand identity.
Yeah, they have a very strong kind of like you would recognize it on the shelf in terms of like the logo, the catch tune. I think that their comedies still have, or their comedies did have a certain kind of recognizable patina, but like I'm not sure what a Peacock drama is right now.
It's Bel Air season 4. So maybe now it will be this.
Right.
Good for them.
Okay. Do you want to get into Say Nothing?
Oh, I just want to say one thing that you were, I feel like people say that I don't give you credit enough for things. I heard you say that right before we started recording in terms of just promoting
the podcast that we have.
Or you, just like you being out there.
Look at these noodles. And it's like, you also did a podcast today.
Yeah, but I don't, I'm a very modest person. Okay. I didn't make the noodles. It's fine.
You could just direct all the praise onto me.
Oh, Chris really carried me this week. You saw
one.
You
could just be like, I am the ramen guy. You know what I mean? Look at him.
This week there was one set of footprints in the podcast sand. Yeah. And that was because Chris was carrying me. That's most weeks. No, I want to say that I am grateful that you reminded me that What We Do in the Shadows now in its final season.
I talked about that with Joe a couple weeks ago, and it is just a remarkable series. Talk about a show that could have gone on forever.
Yes, and I think they did their best to do that. I mean, they gave it like a multi-season renewal. 6. This is season 6. I think it's ending next week.
Yep.
I just want to just apologize. Again, I'm accountable. I kind of walked away because I just wasn't feeling the Guillermo is turned plot in season 5.
Right.
And then it just walked away. So dumb.
Have you
this season?
Which one of because they've done a bunch of really amazing parodies this season. Which ones have you enjoyed?
I really am enjoying the Wall Street stuff. Yeah. The railroad episode also is so good. And I was enjoying the season. We're not going to spoil anything, but to be this, not just this funny for this long, but to be this fucking stupid in the best way,
I know,
is outrageous. And I don't know what any of us were thinking in 2020, but I went back to like the Jackie Daytona episode in season 2, which was, I think for some people, the moment that they started becoming aware of the show.
Yeah, I think the big jumping, like the biggest sort of splash it made was when it had all the cameos as the other vampire.
Oh, and like Nick Kroll and
the council
with the hat.
Yeah.
Oh, that one. Oh, when Taika showed up and there were other celebrities.
I think Tilda Swinton was on it.
Tilda Swinton was on it. For sure. I just went back to the Jackie Daytona episode in which Matt Berry's character Laszlo runs away from Mark Hamill's character, who's mad about basically an unpaid Airbnb fee. And in the span of one act of the show, and the show is like 20 minutes, so one act is maybe 7.5 minutes, he moves to rural Pennsylvania, opens a bar, and then gets incredibly invested in high school girls volleyball. And for some reason, when I was remembering it in the years since I first saw this episode, I was like, a masterpiece of arch comic timing. I watched it again, having forgotten that the real linchpin of the episode is that when he puts a toothpick in his mouth, no one recognizes him as a vampire.
Yeah.
God bless. God bless
Was that
them.
in Altoona? Is that where you opened the bar?
It wasn't named. It definitely had like Lancastery vibes.
You spent any time in Altoona?
No, why you mention Altoona? Has
But
it been in the
where is
news
It's
recently?
like pretty far west, right? In Pennsylvania?
I always thought it was sort of central. Were you worried about like smearing our beloved hometown with
No, I was
bad
just
national
curious.
news?
It is a very specific place for him to go to, but I guess,
Do you what is your I mean, I feel like you don't really mess with Pennsylvania writ large.
I'm trying to think of like, I don't think I've been to that many places in Pennsylvania. I've been everywhere in Philadelphia.
Sure,
and,
twice.
And I've not been that many places up past like Valley Forge.
Okay.
I think I've been to Harrisburg once.
How was it?
It didn't leave an
Did
impression.
it really make an impression?
I'm not trying to be a dick. It just really didn't. I don't even know if I've ever been to Scranton, if I'm being completely
I'm
honest.
born in Wilkes-Barre, PA.
I know.
I'm a NEPA native. Lived there to the ripe age of 1. You gotta tell it in my cultural attitudes and mannerisms.
I really want to talk to you about Say Nothing. Let's get serious here for a second.
All right.
We kind of gave this show short shrift because of travel, but also because it was a binge watch. You can never really tell
Yep.
Where people are in the story. We're going to do full spoilers. So if you haven't watched Say Nothing, we're going to be talking about things that happen in the second half of the season.
But before we do,
Mhm.
you guys should watch. I'm going to turn to camera. You should watch Say Nothing. Say Nothing is one of the most exceptional shows of the year. I think we are going to be talking about this more
on Monday, yeah.
On Monday when we do our top 10s.
Yeah.
I know that few networks are as savvy or as thoughtful about like user interface and user data and how to get shows in front of people than the FX Disney Hulu Corporation. But I do feel like it was kind of a bummer that it was just dumped as a binge.
Yeah, I think that this could have been one of those like 3-3-3.
Yeah.
Like I think that there could have been some argument to be made that this could have gone up in batches. I watched the first 5, I think, when I talked to Joe or something like that. And then pretty evenly, like one after another. I would say the second half of the season is incredibly dark. And there are some episodes where you're just like, I just do not want to start another episode of this right now. You know?
It is almost anti-binge in
especially
that.
the Hunger Strike episode. You're just kind of like, all right, I need to take a break.
And I feel like your guy, Pat Keefe, who was on the show, and Josh the Toomer, who's the showrunner, have said in other interviews that like they did view it, even though it's not an even number of episodes, that basically through 5, it's not a party, but it is again, not a party, not a celebration. I want to be careful, but I'm trying to phrase it correctly because what they did say was the back half is the hangover.
Yes, and I think that the way I would phrase it, and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the show does a pretty astonishing job at illustrating how you pay for who you were when you were in your 20s, when you're older in life.
Yes.
And I think that that's like a universal phenomenon of both in terms of the things that you regret that you did, the things you regret you didn't do, the way your body starts paying for your vices and your habits.
And your sacrifices.
And I think when, the show starts and I'll talk like as if people have watched some of it at least, but Maxine Peake plays an older version of Dolores Price, who is essentially the protagonist of the show, not the hero. And it starts out as a framing device. I think it's kind of like cool. There's this thing called the Belfast Project, where people who were in and around the Troubles in specifically the 70s are talking to a man and basically leaving like an oral history of the times that will be only heard long after their death. At least that's the premise. And you're watching and you're like, good framework for a show. It kind of works as a nice little nesting device. And then there is a switch essentially in episode 7, if I remember correctly, where one of the great needle drops in recent TV history happens. And we essentially jump into...
Is this the Suede needle drop?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And we jump into the older Dolores Price's contemporary reality, like her moment, which is in and around the time when the peace agreement was basically being negotiated, which is also weirdly like around when I was in Ireland for 6 months. Not that matters. But
do you feel like you played some role?
No, but I remember the time very vividly. And so it's interesting to see some of that stuff get played out when I kind of remember reading newspapers there when I was there. And I thought it was remarkable. I thought it was a remarkable thing to take something where you're like, oh, I can kind of see this is the typical prestige TV flashback within a flashback thing, but you never really have that moment. And instead, they use it as a fulcrum, like a turning point for the entire series.
Yeah.
And turn this into a show about guilt and regret and trauma
And purpose.
and the way that the older actors play these parts, where when they were young, they're so vibrant and they're so honestly romantic and sexy and exciting and thrilling. And now they're all compromised or they're all falling apart. I thought it was just an amazing feat. Before we get into anything about recreating historical events and everything else, like that is important.
This show is a masterpiece of construction. And again, that's another reason why I'm not just dinging the binge strategy, the binging and the dumping and binging strategy because it hamstrings us as podcasters, but because so much careful and very intelligent thought was given into how to break the story into a television story. It's not just the first half versus second half. It's the way every performance speaks to each other across time. You know, we will speak specifically about some of the actors and how it's just uncanny how they were cast. Not just that they look like their younger counterparts, but that they look like they embody the faded glory of those counterparts, so that they are the same person, even if there's physical differences. I think that there are these little tricks or filigrees that if you've been watching prestige TV for a while, you will pick up on. And one of them is if people have started the series or finished the series, you will note that it starts literally with a bang. It is an incredibly attention-grabbing opening, which details the real-life abduction of a Belfast mother of 10 named Jean McConville. And what you don't... In that moment, I was like, aha. Again, I knew nothing about this project or how it was going to play out. I was like, well, this is how you do it. If you're telling a historical story, you do the thing that we have started to criticize as a trope in other television shows, which is you start at the most exciting part and then say 3 months earlier, 6 years earlier, just to wet the whistle and get people interested. At no point did I understand that we were witnessing an action that would come to represent everything about the series, that it was correctly chosen. And I think Patrick Radden Keefe chose that as a linchpin moment of his book, but also for the dramatic arc of the series, that they would be true to the history, or at least the history as portrayed by Radden Keefe in his book. But that we were being placed onto a ride that was considered throughout.
Yeah.
The show is going to end with echoes of the way it began. It seems like a small thing, but it felt really, really significant. And I just walked away from it admiring it so much. The other point is one that you said about like all of the emotional weight of the back half of the season. Someone early on, whether it was FX, the producers Nina Jacobson and Brad Simpson, Josh the Toomer, everybody involved, they were like, history doesn't really work as a TV series. History exists. There are smart historical shows, but the very best ones, the ones that elevate and transcend the kind of biopic nature or the Wikipedia of the series nature. And I'm thinking specifically of Chernobyl. And I feel like these shows have a lot to say to each other, including they share some cast members.
That's true.
Is that they are, first and foremost, like all good TV shows, about the emotional journey of characters and of people that you come to care about in all of their conflicted glory. And then the troubles, the setting, the history, and the history lesson, which it was for me, become not secondary, but the backdrop to those journeys. These were decisions made at the highest level early and then executed. And I cannot say enough about that because neither of us are qualified to sit here and be like, aha, if you want to know about the troubles, check out this 9-part FX series on Disney Plus this weekend. It's a fun ride. I learned a hell of a lot. I've also now, supplementing it by looking at Wikipedia and other places that you recommend on the internet. But what I can say is that this is just a absolutely brilliantly constructed television series about all the things that I'm interested in as a television viewer.
Let's talk a little bit about that idea of what the responsibility is of any work of storytelling to historical accuracy. I think that we've discussed this in a variety of different circumstances. I have a pretty high tolerance for, I guess it's like authorial independence, I'm watching something for the purposes of being entertained, not for the purposes of being properly educated. And if there's any justice, like what'll happen is people will watch this show and then they'll inform themselves by reading the book. There's lots of incredible works to read about the Troubles. There has been some criticism about not only the sort of balance that you're talking about, where it foregrounds the characters. The characters do some expository dialogue, but I think it's stylishly done. I think it's well done. But there is less kind of like, here is the everyday kind of the oppression of the occupying British forces. Here is, like what happened to Helen McConville between age 15 and when she's reintroduced to the story later in the series. There's less maybe blow by blow documentation of bombs going off, people being shot. Like it's really all about what these sisters experience, and then later on, like what this family experiences at the very end of the kind of of the series. Any thoughts about whether or not Say Nothing had a greater responsibility to document or depict what was happening in Northern Ireland at any given moment?
It's tough. It's a very tough one. And it's it's easy for us to commentate on it from this vantage point. I think it's worth noting that the angriest voices about this show, one of the McConville children, Michael is furious about this show and considers it a violation and a re-traumatization of his family. And also Marion Price,
I believe she's suing Disney.
Is suing Disney over the depiction of her character in the show. I guess, isn't there like an old journalism thing about like it's good if everyone's mad? Like, that there's some truth to that.
The show also obviously had to put a title card at the end of every episode saying that Jerry Adams has denied any involvement in these crimes. Yeah,
it was vetted, it was considered, and I've seen Josh Toomer talk in interviews that like the book, the best-selling book, was not only rigorously vetted by its author, a New Yorker reporter, but also has existed in the public sphere now for over 5 years and has been argued over and picked apart. So they felt fairly confident in what they were doing. But the deeper question is one that it's really hard to answer. I mean, I think in a weird way, my broadest response is that the creatives have responsibility only to their creativity and to their emotional sense of artistic and aesthetic truth, like in a grandiose way that like when David Lynch makes Twin Peaks: The Return and the people speak a certain way because that's true to him, that's also accurate. That's also comparable to Josh the Toomer's being like, this is how Belfast should feel in my television show.
Sure.
It gets dicey because we are dealing not just with real people and real trauma and real violence and real loss, but we're relatively close to a lot of it. Jerry Adams still very much alive, denying that he was ever involved in the IRA, even though it seems like that one is a little bit tougher to hold water. I think, and I saw, and maybe you're responding to as well, like New York Magazine has covered the show very well with a lot of interviews. Like Anthony Boyle had a good interview on there. Nicholas Quad did a great interview with Patrick Radden-Keefe and Josh the Toomer that I recommend checking out. And there's another piece on Vulture by Roxana Haddadi basically criticizing the show, which I think is a valid and interesting argument, where she was basically saying context matters in a show like this, and the show let everyone down by not giving more context. Now, part of me, the person who still works as a writer-producer in television, is like, that context would have added $100 million to the budget of a show that I feel like was a tough sell no matter what, even to deep-pocketed Disney in this economy. But secondarily, I don't know if showing all of your work and showing the ripple effect of every action within a larger contextual community of like the cost of all the violence, what it felt like to live under British rule outside of a few very deftly drawn strokes, if that helps. In fact, it might muddy it, because then it suggests that you are, in your 9 episodes, trying to tell the definitive story of the Troubles, when the thing that I can't get over about the show is that it makes a really, really, not radical, but deeply compelling and surprising point about youthful political radicalism, which is that in some ways, it's like falling in love or like getting into theater, in that you give yourself to it so completely in the hopes of finding transcendence, and then life keeps going.
Well, and I also feel like the two Price sisters are a very, very effective pair of lenses to look at that through, because for Dolores, it's perhaps there's a romance to it. There's a main character part to it. There is obviously a glamour to it.
She wanted to be an artist. She married an actor, Stephen Ray.
For Marion, it's different. I think Marion is her father's daughter, and I think Marion is a true believer in this show. And I think all the way up until the very end is like, no, like I made a decision what to do with my life and for what I'm fighting for, and I'm going to do it all the way to the end. And I think that they're one of like the great depictions of siblings I've seen on TV in a long time. I thought both the younger performers are obviously so vital and they have so much vitality and like they're so exciting to watch. And then the older actresses who take on the roles are just, they are exactly how you think that would wind up once those people got into late middle age.
Yeah, and the inflection point, the moment that changes, is a moment when they don't die, right? And there's a absolutely brilliantly filmed, brilliantly staged, devastating to watch hunger strike episode that ends with them surviving.
Yeah.
And others have talked about this, that like the way it's depicted, like this is almost like a sliding doors glitch in time moment. They planned to be martyrs, and the glamour of it and the romance of it and the self-sacrifice and the political ideological certainty. And then they didn't. And then what? It's like it's the Graduate ending of the life of a young soldier, basically.
Yeah.
And it's the way that the show articulates conflict. I don't just mean between unionists and the provisional IRA, but like conflict between the internal conflict between people.
Yeah.
How you love
between Brendan and Jerry and between Dolores and Marion. Yeah.
How you love people deeply both by blood and by circumstance, but maybe when life goes on for a long time, as it doesn't for everybody, you might not be on the same road anymore. And suddenly you look up one day and you're in completely different places. You're in completely different levels of society. In the case of Jerry Adams, I mean, it's a remarkable story about time, as much as anything else.
There's moments where characters have to say like, this is the state of things right now, and it explains like where the peace process is.
And characters are always watching TV news when they're doing other stuff.
They're making cake while the thing that is being said about them.
But
just
that's like you in a hotel room. You always got it on.
But there's also a lot of real subtle beauty here. I mean, there's a moment when the McConville children, now grown, think that they've found the remains of their mother. They've been told that they might have something at some like car park that's been built over like a cliffside.
And I don't want to interrupt you though. It's just really remarkable to have a show that gives you the edge of your seat. Like, oh, we're watching a crime movie.
Yeah.
And when people disappear from the screen, it's like, well, this is what happens. There are bodies in crime movies, and then there's hours left. And the people who those bodies left behind are saying, where are our loved ones? And then they become the emotional anchor of the show. And searching for the bodies
and
becomes...
also the tonal shift to go from a real rock and roll first 4 episodes that culminates with one of the best episodes of the year to me, which is Evil Little Maniacs, the episode that's set in London when Marion and Dolores go to bomb London. It turns on the hunger strike episode when they are in prison in the next. And then the change of this tone of this show goes from one of, frankly, youthful celebration. I mean, incredibly hot people doing, like trying to change the world, to broken people trying to figure out what their lives meant. And the ends of some of these characters is so heartbreaking. And on top of that, so I was describing that scene where the McConville kids come to this car park. You can get the sense through a couple of gestures and 1 or 2 lines that they're not very close.
It's brilliantly done.
And it's not like,
they were split up.
Yeah, because they were split up when they were kids, but also just because like some of them are trying to move on and some of them are still obsessed with finding the truth. And, they all are basically corralled together in this trailer while they're waiting for somebody to dig up parking lot to see if their mother is buried there. And they're, telling stories and stuff, but you can tell like they're all going through their own personal experiences with this. I thought that was really, this show did not have to go there, and it did, and it was really rewarding.
And the thought and care in it. Like I'm not specifically arguing against one well-articulated thing in Vulture, but like you only have limited resources. And I think that certainly when it's like pie in the sky, you can do anything, you're planning your show, you're trying to put your fence post down within the confines of the story that was in the Say Nothing book. You're like, well, we can also show this happening. We can show these bombs going off. We can show the police presence. We can show more people's houses being searched so we understand the anguish. Or you can take some of that time and resources and you can find the right actors to play Archie McConville as an adult.
Yeah.
A guy who has maybe less than a dozen lines and less than 5 minutes of screen time, but they're indelible and they're considered. And it's not just showing respect to the family and the story, it's showing respect to the viewer because that is the show that they are making.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there was and I'm sure it played out in like a million little like budget decisions, so there wasn't like a grandiosity of purpose to it, but like ultimately the show is a factor or is a product of the decisions to make an emotional human story whenever possible. Maybe that wasn't the intent sometimes. Maybe they had to cut great sequences that would have addressed some of Roxana's concerns. But I just feel like time and time again, they chose to do the thing that, to my mind, is the harder thing. And we should say, like, the cast is unbelievable. Like, we are living in an era where, like, how many shows premiere where we can name the first 4 to 6 people on the call sheet just because so many great actors are doing TV right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're also talking about The Agency, where like the first 6 people are famous and they're on this show also. Going into this, I feel like, to watching Say Nothing, I feel like maybe Rory Kinnear, who shows up in the first half of the season as
He shows up in 2 episodes, I think.
As Frank Kitson. Yeah. I know who he is. I recognize Anthony Boyle. He was on Manhunt, and he's been in a bunch of other stuff that we've seen recently. But I couldn't have picked him out of a lineup. And now I walk away from the show being like, I don't know if there's a better performance this year than Lola Pettigrew as the young Dolores. I think that what Hazel Dupe does as Marion Price, and then again as the older versions of them, Maxine Peake you mentioned as the older Dolores, Helen Behan as the older Marion. Like, it's not just that they're good performances; they are true performances, and so unselfish in terms of maintaining the same presence as real people, both to the audience and to each other. Anthony Boyle as Brendan Hughes, and then Tom Von Lawler.
I wanted to say something about Tom Von Lawler because, like, this is another character that if you're just watching the first few episodes, you're like, cool, like Dark is still there and is another narrator.
The older version, yeah.
Yeah. And that character's demise, I guess, but also the last few episodes that he's featured in, where he has been shrunk almost by the weight of history. And it's not even guilt as much as just kind of like, I can't believe like I gave my life to this thing and this is what it wound up being after the peace process is over. And his last episode where he's just kind of like absent-mindedly like kind of patting around his pockets and looking around his apartment before he goes to his construction job. Yeah. And dies of a heart attack is like, this guy in the first 5 episodes is this lion, and everything that you would want to kind of like imagine the heroic Republican, warrior as. And then like at the end of his life, he's like, somebody get me a fucking cup of coffee. Like, I'm really like,
I'm part of a construction crew.
Yeah.
Just building a new part of Belfast.
Yeah.
It is I don't know if it's a cautionary tale, but he doesn't burn up, he fades away. And it's painful. It's painful to watch. I also think that there's such subtlety to the performance. Again, like in the, I feel like you do this as well, but like the deep dive of research after you finish something, where like I try not to be spoiled by history if I can help it, and then all of a sudden I want to know everything that Dark Brendan, when he was imprisoned, also did a hunger strike.
Yeah.
And they thought about portraying that, and then they realized, dramatically they needed to focus on Dolores and Marion and make that episode what it was. But then they basically asked Tom Von Lawler to play a man who has been on a hunger strike. Skinnier, but also diminished. Yeah. And has a different relationship with his body. And he does that. These actors are just wild. And like the guy who plays, I'm just looking through the list, you know, the guy who plays Joe Linsky, who, you know, is
Adam Best, right?
His name's Adam Best.
Yeah, he's in Black Doves, and he's also in Kneecap. He's incredible in Kneecap.
And I just want to watch him all the time. It's an incredible marriage of subject matter and place, and then also community of actors, pulling actors from Ireland and Northern Ireland.
I'll say this on the as like a last point is I definitely have been thinking a lot about Marion Price and Michael McConville's problems with the series, and maybe problems with the fact that like a best-selling book that was critically acclaimed and now a series made by a major media conglomerate, one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world,
and all Americans basically,
is you know, like that this is a money-making program and that their lives are changed because of it. And I think it's pretty easy to say, well, you're either on this side of this or you're on that side of this, and in terms of how they feel, not in terms of the conflict itself. And I think it's just okay sometimes to just be like, that's very interesting that that's what their takeaway is.
Yeah.
And that's how they're feeling about it. And I like definitely acknowledge that. And it certainly impacts the way I talk about the show. Like I'm trying to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more open, precise about my language with it. We've seen in a couple of circumstances over the last couple of years, you know, this situation reminded me a little bit of We Own This City, where the end of that series, we had George Pelecanos come on on our show and talk about the end of that series and what it showed, and his confidence that what they showed was what he believed to have happened, despite certain people who are involved in that case being like, that is not what I think happened. I think everybody has every right to what they believe. I think it's tough when you see something like, say, Monsters, the Menendez brothers story, and it becomes almost like we need to now rectify things, or people almost get involved with these true crime stories as if they're not real people. So I don't really know if I have like a statement or a question for you right there. It's just more like I think that the way that the series ended, and then reading about the series and reading about how some of the people involved feel about it, is important work, just because it makes you a little bit more tempered, and you're like, it's not just a show.
They've done something rare in that this is ultimately a project that celebrates complexity and messiness and ambiguity. And in fact, that's the show's language that it speaks. You know, you could walk away from this, as we have, feeling absolutely turned around about every single person that's presented. I guess maybe other than the McConvilles, who just suffered. But you know, the show gives a certain logic, cold and calculating, but logic to Jerry Adams. You know, to the point of like, well, the peace process demanded these things.
Yes.
You know, and if the result is peace, then that was always the goal, or what was the goal, you know? And then you go back and then you see these moments land on characters like Dolores and Marion's father, you know, who I think is a fascinating character that haunts it, who raises his children to be revolutionaries, and then also is given the dignity of just kind of growing old and fading away, and the deep disappointment of that.
I think it's also regret. Like the compression of like the time in this series is fascinating, because you do have characters, and you feel that way when you're reading the book too, where people are doing spells in jail and getting out and then having to get on with their lives. Or like this father is seeing this younger generation both achieve something he never thought would be achieved, but also not quite the way he wanted it achieved.
There's a moment late in the series when Marion Price is back at it, basically. And first she's sort of razzing her teenage kids who are just more concerned about what they're going to wear to school. And then she sees the SWAT team pull up, and she lights a cigarette and tells her daughters to go upstairs because mommy's about to get arrested. Yeah. And the way that moment is performed is one ultimately of relief that the world is snapping back into a place that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that is what is meant to happen. And that gives her a sense of purpose. And that's a wild thing to observe. And just ultimately, I think you're asking the right questions. I think the show asked the right questions. And I mean, look, in 2024, end of the year, I'm excited that we're talking about an amazing show that is uncomfortable, that isn't easy. Another show that is likely to be on both of or some of our top 10 lists, or at least an honorable mention, is Black Doves.
Yeah.
And when we talked about the first half, we'll talk about the back half regardless of where it is on our list. But like,
currently the number one show on Netflix.
Is it?
Mhm.
I mean, people really get killed on that show. And that is not the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for a show to be like, actually, that is ultimately the point. I mean, that is what separates Dollars and Marion's, youthful idols and like gap years from Stephen Ray's or other people, punk rockers.
Or the
anyone
actress
else.
who's like, I want to play you. And then they get into the deeper and deeper into the
Yeah.
conversation. She's just like, this, I don't want to do this. Yeah.
There's a different weight and a different cost. And I think that it's important actually for viewers to get used to the idea of not being comforted by the art that they see all the time. Not being told that every dead body was a bad guy who definitely didn't have family, who didn't matter, who we won't spend any time on because it's funnier to see the way that his arterial blood lands on Keira Knightley's face. I don't mean to beat up on Black Doves because I actually have already articulated and feel like that show gets its balance right and is
because it's all
clever and
about
smart
tone and it's
fun.
all about what are you trying to do here.
But,
like I can go either way. I can go lioness. I can go. I mean, like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I could.
We don't have to choose, which is the beauty of our consumer culture, but also of the wide variety of art that we have to play with these days. But like, it is good to go closer to the flame sometimes.
Yeah.
And particularly when, and I hope we do get to talk to more members of the creative team, but like, to the best of my knowledge and my like just personal taste, I feel like they took this project on with a seriousness of purpose and a complexity of thought that is super rare. Like I am when we covered we talked about the trailer, which was really good a few months ago. And I was sort of couldn't believe that it was happening this fast. We had read that this was happening, but I didn't really understand that somehow the combination of Color Force, which is Brad Simpson and Nina Jacobson, and FX pushed this over the finish line with no stars, with no watering down of anything. And maybe ultimately, Bob Iger was like, just dump it all. Like, let's see what let's cut our losses. I don't mean to put it on him, but I mean maybe the artistic bona fides are also why we ended up with the commercial dump that we got.
Sure.
Who knows? But I think it's crazy that it got made and that it is as thoughtful as it is. And just to circle all the way back, like I definitely think this is the best historical television program since Chernobyl. And I wonder if some of the friction about it is just the proximity, because Chernobyl was done, 40 years after the event, and the event itself, the players, I mean, those that were remarkably survived, aren't going to talk to The Guardian, or the New York Times. It feels like a world away, and that distance allowed Craig Mazin, I'm sorry, to play with it.
Yeah, dramatize it.
To dramatize
Sure.
it, to tell the story he wanted to tell here. And I think this is it's more that than the other, but like there is art here.
Yeah, and I think in both cases, in both series and both pieces of history, these are pieces of history that people were very intent on being like, people cannot know what happened here. Like I think with Chernobyl, obviously, like within the context of the show itself, but I think generally in history, like there was a giant like sort of effort to both escape blame, but say like it's not going to be as bad or whatever. People can go watch Chernobyl. In this series, I think that there is the entire premise of the series is that these people are speaking for a project that will not come out until after they die because they cannot bear to be around, nor will they be allowed to live if it was found out that they were touts in the language of the show. So it's a difficult gymnastic trick to pull off where you're like, this is something that people did not want to reckon with.
Yeah, and I think that like the most dramatic moments in humanity are these just inexplicable moments when a character looks up and is like, how did I find myself here?
Yeah.
What was the series of choices that led me here? And that's true in Hamlet. It's true in Breaking Bad. But there is something incredibly sharp about it happening in recent history the way that this show portrays it. Not so that when we reach the moment, and I guess at the end of this long talk about it, we could talk about without too much specificity for people who are still being convinced by this long monologue, but like the very last moment of the show that really connects the Price sisters to the McConville kidnapping and everything else and all the regret and all the weight. When we get to that moment, it feels tactile. That question of how did we find ourselves here? Two sisters who love each other, and that love is remarkable and dramatic and passionate and compelling. And something happens at the very end here that is, you can't really come back from it.
No. And
yet one of the sisters comforts the other, which is what she's been doing throughout. And if you talk about like complicity and things that make, that fictionalize real life, like that is a moment when everyone is complicit in the way that really only art can do, in terms of the audience, in terms of the history and the characters made up and real.
That's really well put. Let's end it there. Thanks to Kaya for producing us today. We'll be back on Monday with our 10 best episodes of the year.
No, 10 best shows.
10 best shows of the year.
Yeah.